Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we're greeted with Dr. Hardt. Dr. Hardt, thank you again for being here.
Hi, Doug. Always fun to be with you. We always cover such wonderful topics.
We do, and I always learn so much. And the topics I get are from the comments that people are leaving us, either in the alumni group, which we have for alumni, which is a very thriving group, or here on perhaps YouTube or Facebook or social media or the website where people are finding this. One question I do get a lot, Dr. Hardt, and I'm curious about this, is I know we've talked about alpha brainwaves, right? And the importance of alpha. We've also talked about theta brainwaves and how they can be trained and how they're different. But what about delta, right? There's a brainwave called delta brainwaves. What are they, and can they actually be trained?
They can. And we do provide delta trainings. We've got 18 levels of the delta training. As you know, there's 24 levels of alpha and 24 levels of theta. With the delta training, there are 18. Now, delta trainings are very special, and they require, as a prerequisite, multiple alpha trainings and multiple theta trainings, at least some of which have to be done with me. The reason is that delta trainings are by invitation only, because delta confers siddhis, which is a Sanskrit word that means powers, mind powers. And so I'll tell you some delta stories to indicate some preliminary ones. And then I'll tell you the first training I ever did, which was in 1988, in which I discovered the brainwaves of Kundalini, which are synchronous delta, high amplitude, even as low as 1 hertz or so. The range of delta is 0 to 4 cycles per second, 0 to 4 hertz. Okay, so this training took place in California, in my training center on Martin Avenue, right across the street from the San Jose International Airport. And we had a man in training who was from France. His name was Terry, Thierry. And on the first day, when we're looking through at that time, we were using paper polygraphs. I'm flipping through the paper polygraph, and I saw this massive delta, which was, his alpha was running along around 3,000, and the delta was running along at about 3,000 on our scale. And in the past, I had seen people have alpha, and then later, or they would have delta. Well, he had both of them occurring at the same time. Now, I've actually had people talk to their neurologist post their alpha training, and the neurologists were actually like freaked out because according to the standard cant of neurology, you cannot have delta in the waking brain. Delta is normally seen in coma or in the 2 deepest stages of sleep, stage 3 and stage 4 of sleep. And there have been studies like with college students where they would have them sleep in the lab with their brainwaves being recorded with a tape recorder under the bed that would be programmed to turn on and play lessons that they wanted to learn only when they were in delta. And what these studies showed is there is absolutely zero information pickup from these recordings if they're played only during delta. And that's not the case if these are played in alpha or like in REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where there is some alpha, or in theta, which is stage 1 or stage 2 of sleep. No pickup of any information in delta. And so, as you know, in a coma, people are, insensitive to, the reflexes don't work, things like that. And so this man, Terry, had waking delta mixed with big alpha. And so I asked the standard question that I ask whenever I see big delta like this. I say, are you aware of being able to influence other people? And he freaked out. He actually became frightened. And it took a while, to reassure him. And then he told a story. He had been a high-ranking member of the French government. And because of his high position, he became aware of plots and schemes and plans by the secret government, the deep state. And he used his delta powers to foil these bad guys' schemes and plots. Now, these people were not used to having their plots, as the Scottish poet said, gang after glee. And when they had 11 consecutive plots that failed to achieve their objectives, the bad guys called a high-level review. And they began simply by listing the names of all the people who knew anything about any of these projects, including just the name. Well, Terry's name was the only name that showed up on all the lists. So a spokesman with 2 hired assassins barged into his office in the French government and said, "We're onto you, and we're going to kill you. Except there's one way that you could live, and that is if you join us and use your obvious powers to help us." So Terry went deep, he's a very ethical man, and he gathered his Delta powers, and then he came back and he said, "No, there's a third option, which is I will resign from government and you will leave me alone." And he put all the power of Delta into that, and they're like, oh, and they crept out of his office. And so he followed through. He resigned from government. And shortly after that, he shows up at Biocybernaut. And so because of his obvious high ethics, he's the only person to whom I have ever given a Delta training who had not done multiple alphas to work on the forgiveness, do the ethical cleansing, and then the theta to learn how to go deep and to be conscious. Like guidance for theta trainings, I sometimes say to people, head straight for sleep, and just before you go unconscious, make a sharp left turn and hang out there. And so Terry obviously had Delta, he had Alpha in abundance, so I gave him a Delta training. And what he did was very interesting. In his mind, he went out into the world and he found people living in darkness. One example was a big fat Mexican drug dealer who was waddling down an alley on the way to give an order to have 13 Mexican policemen beheaded because they were, messing with his operation. And so then a little kitty would run out from behind a rain barrel. And the way he's ponderously, waddling down the alley, if he doesn't change his stride, he's going to step on the kitty and crush it to death. And so if he lets his stride or shortens his stride, makes a little effort, he can spare the kitty's life. Well, so what Terry did was he noticed in this state that everyone has light within them. It's not their light, it's the light. But what he realized was these people living in darkness could not see their own light. So he very subtly adjusted the frequency of their light so they could now see it. And so if the Mexican drug dealer crushes the kitty to death, he would see his light dim. If he made a little effort, spared the kitty's life, he would see his life brighten. So guess what? He now has a conscience. He now is aware of his own light. And it does not compel him to act good or bad, but he has feedback for the first time, probably in his life, adult life, about the consequences of his action. And so this is a very important lesson because one must never use these powers to override the will of another person. That's one definition of evil. If somebody is intent on doing bad things and you go in and you use your Delta powers to manipulate them not to do those bad things, you might think you're being virtuous, but you have committed an evil because you have overridden another human's free will. But what Terry did, he went right up to that line where he gave the people information by seeing their own light of the consequences of their actions. And so he gave them an opportunity. Now, the first person, that story is very important because it shows why we must not use the Delta powers to override another person's will. So even one of my heroes, Obi-Wan Kenobi, saying to the Imperial troopers, as they're he and Luke and the 2 droids are trying to enter Dantooine, he goes, "These aren't the droids you're looking for." And the stormtrooper goes, "These aren't the droids we're looking for. Move along, move along, move along, move along." And so to a certain extent, he's overriding his will. Now, we all sort of celebrate and cheer the fact that they made it into Dantooine and were able to find Han Solo and the Wookiee and book passage off planet. But there is an ethical misstep there. And so in Delta, we have to be very, very aware of that. Now, the very first person in whom I ever saw waking Delta was a man named John. and he trained in 1988. And on the third day of his training, he burst forth with big delta waves across 6 of the 8 channels. The occipitals did not participate, but the frontals, where it was the biggest, the temporals and the centrals had huge synchronous delta. And sometimes he would like twitch first, and then these would happen. It would run 10, 15 seconds, and then sometimes there'd be a twitch when he'd come out of it. Now, his alpha waves were, should we say, modest, nothing to write home to mother about, but there were these massive delta waves. So at the end of the day, when I'm flipping through the paper polygraph, looking at these with him, I'm asking, well, what is this? And he goes, I don't know. Well, no, John was an interesting guy. He was small bird-like, self-effacing. I say in a crowd of 2, you wouldn't notice him. And yet I find out he's on a 3-year paid leave of absence from IBM with, amazingly, no requirement to go back. So I'm going, what does this guy have that IBM finds so valuable that they're willing to pay him 3 years sabbatical with no guarantee that he's going to return? And so I didn't find out for a while. But what I did find out was about John's background. He had been a mid-level clerk working for IBM in Marseille, France. And one hot summer day, he was caught in an horrific 6-hour traffic jam in downtown Marseille. You know, this is where the French blow their horns until the batteries run down. So there's cacophony, din, heat. Then they get out and they swear at each other in French and they fight. And John, in this cacophony and din, John had his first ever out-of-body experience. He's flying around over the jammed up cars. You know, the tow trucks, you know, were pulling them away from the edges of the jam. It took 6 hours to clear the city. And he would swoop down and intervene, stop fights, things like that. Well, next day, he's back at work. Now, I don't know what happened or how this happened, but to the credit of his IBM managers, John now has a new job. To describe his new job, let's say IBM wants to build a new plant in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to make a product line. So they send a highly paid team of experts there who scout the land, look for resources, water, availability of roads, public transport, big enough population center nearby. And then they come up with a list and they leave. And another highly paid team of experts come in and they negotiate to buy one of those pieces of land. Maybe they have to pay some bribes to local officials under the table. And then they leave and another highly paid team of experts come in and they negotiate with construction companies to build the facility. And some of them stay behind to make sure the contractor doesn't substitute eighth-inch steel where quarter-inch steel is specified. And toward the end of the construction process, another highly paid team of experts come in to start putting ads in the newspaper, interviewing, recruiting. And toward the end of that, a smaller team comes in and they then hire the managers. And at the end, over budget and time and way over budget and money, the plant is there, the workers come in, raw materials, power, everything comes in, and the process runs and product go out the door and IBM goes ka-ching. Well, what IBM found was they could forget all those highly paid teams of experts, and all they had to do was send John. And John would produce the finished result way under budget in time and way, way under budget in money. So when John said to his manager, I'm leaving, the manager goes, oh, you can't leave. John goes, no, I'm leaving. And the guy goes, well, you probably just need some time off. We'll give you a year's sabbatical. And John goes, no, I'm leaving. The manager is dumbfounded. He goes, well, we'll give you a 2-year leave of absence. John goes, no, I'm leaving. The manager at wit's end goes, well, we'll give you a 3-year leave of absence. And John goes, no, I'm leaving. The manager goes, desperate now. He goes, we'll give you a 3-year leave of absence and you don't have to promise to come back. And John goes, okay. And that's where he was in that 3-year leave of absence, paid leave of absence from IBM. And there was no way he was going to go back. And so now we come to day 4 for his training. And what I had said to Maureen, my lab assistant, this chamber he was in has 4 speakers on the front wall, 4 speakers on each of the side wall, and 4 speakers on the back wall. And we were only giving John feedback from the front 4 speakers. He was doing Alpha 1. And so I said to Maureen, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to route those 6 channels of Delta to 2 speakers on each side and 2 speakers behind. And if he's at the same volume as his itty bitty Alpha, and if he ever makes those Delta waves again, he's going to get blasted by these sounds. Of course, we're going to tell him that if those sounds blast, that means the Delta's coming up, and then you pay attention what was going on. So you can tell us, so you won't go, I don't know. And so it happened on day 4. Boom, 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 boom. And at the end, I go, I'm all excited because I'm about to learn something really phenomenally exciting and new. And I go into the chamber at the end and I go, what was it? And he goes, well, what was what? I go, well, when all those tones are going off. He goes, oh, well, that was when the Kundalini was coming up. And I go, Kundalini, you have Kundalini. Why didn't you tell me? And he goes, oh, well, I didn't think it was that important. And I didn't think you'd know what it was anyway. And wow. Okay, so that was John. I never did really find out why he left IBM. Remained a mystery. But a couple of years later, with the help of Foster Gamble, I had created a company called Mindset. And we were, for the first time, doing theta trainings for the public. We had 4 chambers, 3 people in training. So I got electrodes on, and I was lying in the theta chair during enhancement, same time the other trainees were doing their thing. And I had my first ever Kundalini awakening. It was a massive surge of energy coming up my spine. It was like, if you've ever seen a high pressure fire hose fighting a big fire, it takes 3 strong firemen to hold the thing. So it doesn't, if they let go, it whips around like that. That's how they shut the pressure off. That was the energy. And everything that was me, my identity, my history, everything was pushed way to the outer edges so this energy could come through. I don't know how I made it through the end of the day. That was the last day of the training. But I go home to San Francisco. I had 2 roommates. One of them I'd promised to go to the Hong Kong restaurant for lunch the next day. It's on Church Street, right near Market. And it's a dangerous place for me to go because a couple of doors down is the Aardvark used bookstore. Well, and I had this book buying habit, but I was now running 2 companies and a university research project, and I had no time to read. I had a reading habit. When I was in 2nd grade, I had measles, which affected my eyes, and I've had to wear glasses ever since. And so my father made a strict rule that I was not allowed to read more than 24 books a week. And so I would come home from the library with bags of books. He would count them to make sure there were no more than 24. But of course, I would cheat. After school, I would go to the library and read illicit, unauthorized books. And so I had this book buying and reading habit. But now I'd go to the store and I'd buy books, and 2 weeks later, I hadn't read them. I hadn't had time. So I go, Tom, I can't go there. He said, well, he was my roommate. And he goes, well, you could just look. I come. Okay, we'll go. So the books are not marked. They have barcode, but there's no prices. And so I'm wandering down the aisle. Oh, this is interesting. I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll buy one. So pretty soon my arm's full of books. And I go, Tom, I can't carry any more books. We have to go to checkout. So I dumped all the books on the counter, intending to tell the clerk, well, just tell me the prices because I'm not sure I'm going to buy any one. Maybe I'll buy one. But Tom distracts me with a question. So the clerk is like running the books through, and I'm talking to Tom. And then the clerk goes, oh, well, that'll be, and he gives me some dollar figure. And I had this shiver run through me. And I go, well, I wasn't going to buy any, but if you give them to me for this price, I mentioned the price, I'll take them all. And the shiver ran through the guy, and he rings them up, puts them in 2 big bags. I walk out the door, and I'm standing there. Tom comes out, and he goes, how'd you do that? I go, Tom, what do you mean? He goes, how did you do that? Tom, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, that was the owner. He never gives anybody any discount. I saw you. You got all those books for less than the price of the cheapest one. How did you do that? And all of a sudden, I knew how John was getting these people around the world to be honest and to perform under budget in time and money. And I also knew why he quit and why he would never go back, because he was using his Delta powers to manipulate the will of these people who wanted to cheat and lie and steal so that they wouldn't cheat and lie and steal. And John had evolved ethically to the point where he realized he could no longer do that. So he had to quit that job, to IBM's immense dismay. So this is a little background into my discovery of Delta. I subsequently made a scientific report on Delta waves at the Winter Brain Conference, which was hosted at the time by Future Health, Rob Call's organization. And when I presented my paper afterwards, Gary Schwartz, a very famous psychologist who'd been at Harvard and Yale, I think he's now at Arizona State University, he came up to me and he said, when I was at Harvard, I had a student come in who showed, and he said he was practicing Kundalini yoga. And he said, you got to measure my brainwave. You got to. And Gary felt compelled, no doubt, by the kid's Delta waves, to take him down to the neurology department. Gary knew enough to put, EEG electrodes and put the paper in the polygraph. And he saw a record pretty similar, he said, to what I had showed to the Winter Brain group, which was the first scientific report of Kundalini. And Gary knew enough about brainwaves to know that this was like, this is not normal. So he had a friend in the neurology department. He took the polygraph record and showed it to the guy. And the neurologist professor freaked out. And he goes, don't ever let him do that on university property again. But could I have the record? I want to borrow the record. I want to show it to some of my colleagues. And Gary said, then he promptly lost the record, which Gary said is what scientists often do with anomalous data. So now I know personally over 150 Kundalini yoga teachers, and none of them has ever had a Kundalini yoga experience. So the fact that you're practicing these procedures called Kundalini yoga is no guarantee you're going to have that experience. But this student at Harvard did have that, and Gary got it on record, but then of course the record was lost because it was anomalous data. And so we do Delta trainings here at Biocybernaut by invitation only. We need to be sure that people have done enough ethical cleansing with the forgiveness work in Alpha and the deep dives of Theta to make sure that they will use the powers that they will attain unto in the Delta training and use them wisely and ethically.
Wow, absolutely fascinating as always, Dr. Hardt. Thank you so much. I'm sure I'll have follow-up questions coming up. Thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thank you for letting me to tell that story. I don't think I've ever told it on camera, so we could share it with others.
We'll share it. We'll be sharing this with the world. Thank you again, Dr. Hardt.
Hi, I'm Tony Robbins. Listen, if you are looking to improve your brain, your psyche, your ability, your emotions, your ability to really maximize your performance, and you want to really dig into your brain, my dear friend, Dr. Jim Hardt, and his Biocybernaut program is extraordinary. I've been through it myself. My wife Sage has, members of my family have, and we found it to be truly extraordinary. But it is not for the faint at heart. Unless you're dead serious about really taking things to the next level, don't bother. We went through the Alpha program designed to maximize your ability to create alpha waves. And it was challenging and it was incredibly rewarding. And I'd recommend it to anybody serious about improving the quality of their lives or including the quality of their family lives as well. So check out Cybernaut, check out Dr. Jim Hardt. And if you do, I think you'll be really, really pleased. And the entire time you are learning to think and how you think these electrodes create sounds. And you learn how to put yourself in the zone of alpha. But it's a bitch. It's horrible. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that wants easy experiences, but I'd recommend it to anybody that wants to grow immensely. And by the first day, I'm like, who do I got to shoot to get out of this thing? Oh, it's me. I'm the one that did this shit, right? But by the end of the week, all three of us were able to go into this state of alpha. And if you're familiar with alpha, the best way I can describe alpha is there's no problem that can't be solved in alpha. Because every problem that we have was created by us.
Thank you for being here and absorbing this information about the science of brainwaves and about the stories of people whose lives have been beneficially altered, improved by doing brainwave training at Biocybernaut. And now I'm reaching out to you to invite you to come and be a part of the Biocybernaut adventure. Biocybernauts are to inner space what astronauts are to outer space. So come and adventure with us. And if you'd like to leave a comment on the videos, you can do that, or there's a link you can click if you'd like to learn more. We welcome you to Biocybernaut.